Good evening, good evening, all of you. I welcome all of you in the Friday Fundas today's lecture on data privacy. And today we have with us our chairman and and for remarks. Can I request start ICM Auto, please? And I request all the participants to place your hands on your heart.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्विमाणः निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्वैता 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 एतद्वैता.
Thank you, Mr. Raj, and all of you. So, friends, myself, CA Piyush Chandak, Regional Council Member from Nashik. I again welcome all of you in today's Friday Funda lecture. It is about digital personal data protection. And I think everyone must be knowing before earlier, this digital privacy was taken care by the Information Technology Act. And now we have a separate legislation for the provision for this purpose, which is known as Digital Personal Data Protection Act, that is the DPD. And they think how that DPD Act is going to the CA are getting in this DPD, what are the opportunities coming up in this emerging area. So we have with us a knowledgeable faculty for that. So before starting the lecture, I'll request Secretary CA Saurabh Ajmera to give his remarks. Over to you, Saurabh.
Thank you, Piyush Bhai. And at the outset, I welcome you all in this very interesting series that is Friday Funda, where we are discussing some offbeat topic rather than a professional topic which we are keeping in other sessions. Friends, this year we at WRC is highly committed to empower all our members, and we are celebrating the presence of our existence as ICI as we have completed 75 years on 1st July. And that pride we are celebrating in a different way here at WIRC, where we are saying P stand for perform. You have to perform as per the need of the hour. Why we are saying to perform? We all are already performing in a different way. Friends, India is the pharma capital. India is the software capital of the world. We have the youngest population from the world, and we are the 5th largest economy in the world, and we are the 3rd largest startup ecosystem in the world. So we are saying to all our members, we have to perform with the opportunities available in our profession. Then R stand for relearn. Why we are saying for relearning? Because whatever we have taken, we have to keep them updated also. So that is why we are hosting we are hosting on a regular basis 2 series. One is in direct text relearning series and another is in indirect text relearning series. Friends, then I stand for innovation, and which is our core. You can say today in this year we are very, very lucky to have very innovative and energetic chairman with us here, Pit Kabraji. And he believe completely in the innovation with the digital front, with the technology. So he always welcome all the initiatives related to the automation at WRC. And this year we are bringing various automation at WRC in our day-to-day working for the benefit of our members. And then friends, these stand for distinguish ourselves. Why we are saying to our members to distinguish yourself? Because we have to create something specific, and that is why we are organizing sectorial based series at WRC in which we are discussing for insurance. And today also we have discussed with various MDs and ED. Those are available at WRC and some you can say IP conclave. And we have discussed that how we can organize a program for banking sector. So likewise, we are creating something specific for our members. And then E stand for enrich our ecosystem. We are in the era of social audit. We are in the era of, you can say, ESG, where 3 Ps are very important. First, we have to think for planet, then public, and then profit. So my friends, my sincere request to all of you, we are organizing various programs. We are doing various networking opportunities for our members. Please keep updated yourself at WRC and do participate in all the activities in a very effective manner. With this, now I welcome the very innovative and dynamic chairman of WRC, C. Arpit Kabraji, for his address.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Rather, good evening, everyone. Warm welcome to this very exciting the Friday Fundas. One that we decided and we thought of celebrating different kind of small concepts which would help our practice has now evolved into a much sought after series. We at WRC have invited all our members, whoever is interested in speaking, whoever interested in doing in any way want to contribute to the fraternity are most welcome through our program called as My Role at WRC. And I'm glad to share today's faculty, C. Harshad Tekwani, a very, very dear friend of mine, just reached out from one of these places suddenly and just filled up the form on My Role at WRC and asked, can I talk on something on this? And believe me, friends, today it's the era of data privacy. The kind of regulations that have come in, the kind of compliances that I've set in, let me tell you, not only it is super onerous, I mean, there's a huge penalty, consequences are huge, but for us as chartered accountants, it's a huge, huge opportunity for compliances. If at all someone, a stakeholder wants compliance from data perspective, privacy perspective, if we can set up and if we can step up in a sense to say that, yes, look, we have the capabilities to identify and report whether we are compliant or not, whether our clients are compliant or not, I think that will be a huge, huge opportunity for all of us as chartered accountants. While we talk about data privacy and we are talking about these principles, let me tell all of you, there is a new concept called as GAP, GAPP, which has been introduced largely in Canada, generally accepted privacy principles. It's time that, as chartered accountants, we all, and as ICI and WRC, we are trying to make some steps, some movement towards setting up GAP. Let me tell you, this is the first program that that is happening on data privacy here at WRC, and I'm happy that Harshad has taken it, and he's trying and he'll try and make sure that we talk about all of this to all our members. Small baby steps, and I'm sure we'll have a very wonderful opportunity. Just like we have IBC. Today we were celebrating all of that, and the entire IBBI board was over here, from the head Rajivji Mittal to all the heads of banking over here at WRC. And it was a very, very strong, focused discussion that we've had over here at WRC. With these words, I welcome all of you. Quickly, some of the programs, some of the initiatives that we have at WRC will display, and I'll request Piyush Bhai. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for setting up this platform. Over to you, Piyush Bhai.
Thank you, Arpit sir. So, as has been discussed by the secretary and the chairman, today we are discussing on personal data privacy in specific. So today we have with us C. Harshad Tekwani, who is expert in forensic audits and is from a big firm. So before the starting, we'll just have a look at the WRC activities. Yes, thanks a lot, sir. Thank you. So, Harshad bhai, can we set up your screen, please?
You can introduce meanwhile, Piyush bhai.
It's disabled, I think, for me. Just a minute.
Saurabh, may I request? I think Piyush bhai is finding some difficulty. Maybe you can please introduce yourself for all of us.
It's my pleasure to introduce Harshad Bhai as a session faculty. He is a qualified chartered accountant, certified fraud examiner, bachelor in law and bachelor in commerce with more than 11 years of experience in risk and governance, data privacy audit, GDPR compliances, trade and anti-corruption and AML compliance audit, internal audit, forensic audit, SOX compliances, private risk assessment, private impact assessment, also a speaker of various forums on risk and governance and forensic audit. He have very huge experience related to this data privacy, you can say audit also. So let's welcome with a big round of applause
Thank you.
to our faculty CA, Harshad Tekwani ji.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank Arpit ji for giving me this opportunity. Saurabh ji, Piyush ji, thank you for this opportunity. And without wasting much time, I'll start today's session and provide background on this emerging landscape of data privacy in India. Okay. So when I say emerging landscape, the reason because if you see other regions, I'll discuss in a while, like EU region or the US region, we have this particular act and we have the data privacy concept since very long. So for example, if I take the EU region, since in EU region, basically the data privacy concept is there since 1995 with the first data protection directives which were introduced. Then there were law enforcement directives which were introduced, and in 2016, after much deliberation and much discussion, GDPR came into picture. That is the General Data Protection Regulations. Then they came up with the e-privacy directives and NIS directives. So since very long, I would say 1995 to 1998, we have the privacy concept and the privacy laws and regulations present in the European region. And with GDPR in 2016, it went to next level. Then, when I talk about the US has various different kind of acts which covers the data privacy regime and data privacy requirement. You call it GLBA Act, Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, HIPAA, which is Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, Communications Health, High Tech, again Health Information and Technology and Economic and Clinical Health Act. Then we have a COPA, which is Children Online Privacy Protection Act. We have these state-wise regulations. You might have heard about CCPA, that is the California Consumer Protection Act, which has been recently amended and has changed its name and its form. Then we have a Colorado one, Utah one. We have a Surveillance and Obscene Act, which again puts some privacy requirements. So there are various state and federal regulations in US also present, which talks about data privacy and data privacy regime in there. Now, when I talk about data privacy laws or data privacy regime, what basically it is about. So if I say income tax act, so it will provide you how to calculate income tax, which are the incomes will be there on which the tax will be there. The different provisions with respect to the assessment and administration and everything with respect to the income tax. But when I talk about Data Privacy Act, what are the contents of Data Privacy Act? What Data Privacy Act address to? So generally, data privacy usually address to 5 different areas. Number one is the individual right. The right of the data subject or the data principal. They have a usually right to know, right to access their data, right to correct their personal data, right to delete their personal data, then right to portability, right to opt out from processing of personal data, and right to non-discrimination. The second part of the data privacy law talks about the business obligation. Like what are the obligations which are there on the person or the individuals who are processing the personal data. Like in DPDP Act, we will see requirement of consent. We will see what are the requirements with respect to data protection officer, a lot of other different requirements. But these requirement ranges from the collection, processing, limitations which are placed on the businesses, implementation of privacy. There is a new concept which is being famous, that's a privacy by design, like, embedding the privacy into your processes. Then we have a data breach notifications, data breach management. Then we have data privacy audits, data privacy impact assessments, and a lot of things are there which are the business obligation, and the business has to comply when they are processing personal data of the individuals or data subjects or data principal. Now, then the third part of the particular law talks about generally on the scope. We have heard that GDPR has an extraterritorial scope. So what is the scope of this particular act? Who are covered into this basically in a particular data privacy act? Like for example, entities processing personal data, for example, DPDP. So when we say digital personal data, so entities which are processing digital personal data, not the non-digital version, like hard copy papers, that are not as of now included in this particular act. So what is the scope of the particular act, where it will be applicable, whether it will be applicable to entities outside India or entities, in some other jurisdiction, or maybe, how it is will be applicable to what extent. So scope defines that particular area of the Data Privacy Act. Enforcement, like, rule making authority, data protection officer, data protection board we will have, and all those things, penalties, prosecutions, and the last and the very important part is the outsourcing, offshoring of the data and the localization of data. In India, somewhere this was taken care by the IT Act or the respective, act of the sectors where the data localization was there. But usually what happens is when there is a transfer of data, personal data from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, this kind of acts plays a very important role. Now, after DPDP Act, we'll see how this is very important. And as a chartered accountant, why this area, like cross-border transfer of data, becomes very important. Okay. Let's talk about now journey of basically Indian Data Protection, Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023. Now, this started with the Supreme Court case of K.S. Puttaswamy and Union of India in 2017. Wherein right to privacy was recognized for the first time and as a fundamental right, and there was a lot of discussion. Post that, there was a committee paper released, white paper released in November 2017 by the Justice B.N. Shri Krishna. Then there was a deliberation done, and there was a bill in 2018 which was presented by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. There was a deliberation, and again that was tabled on the Lok Sabha. Then it was sent to Joint Parliamentary Committee in 2019. In 2023, a new latest draft was introduced of this particular bill, that is Personal Data Protection Bill 2023. And quickly after that, if you see, it was passed, and on 7th of August, it was passed in Lok Sabha, 9th of August in Rajya Sabha, and 11th of August, it received President's assent, and it was published in the official gazette. So from 17 to 19 to 21, different versions of Act came into picture, bill came into picture, and finally, Bill 2023 was passed and enacted. So a long journey from 17 to 2023, this bill has covered. Now, when I will before I discuss this particular bill act or the requirement of this particular act, I want to discuss few key terms of this particular act, or key terms you can say related to the data privacy area or data privacy regime. Okay. The way we have the definition of assessee or some key terms in the Income Tax Act, same way we have key terms which are very, very important with respect to data privacy law. Number one is the data fiduciary. You might have heard same way in the GDPR, that's a data controller. Now, who is a data fiduciary? Data fiduciary is a person who decides that why I am collecting the data, personal data, why I am processing the personal data, and what processing will be done on that personal data. So that will be the person who will be, deciding everything about the collection to processing to retention, storage, and deletion of the personal data. You can say decision making with respect to the personal data lies with the data fiduciary. Now, in most of the cases, it will be a company who is collecting a personal data. For example, let's say there is an online portal or a mobile application, kind of, who's providing medication services. So you can appoint, you can, book a doctor's appointment on that particular app. Now, to book a doctor's appointment on that particular app and to go for a video or teleconferencing call with the doctor, what personal information is required from your side will be decided by that particular app, and that app will become data fiduciary, because the app will be the one, or the company behind the app will be the one who will be deciding what information I need from your side, your personal information, what details I will be providing to third party for processing, like I may provide to my doctor that okay, this is the information you need to process about the patient or the person who is booking appointment. Then how much time I will retain this information, for what other purposes also I will use this information, and when I will delete this information. All these things are decided by that particular company who is behind the app, and that company will be data fiduciary. Now, who is the data principal? Data principal or data subject in GDPR is the person about which the personal information is. So, for example, if I'm collecting your personal information, then you will be the data principal. If, let's say, you are booking on a mobile app, okay, and you are providing your information, that you will be then data principal, and you will have some rights which are given by this particular act with respect to your personal data. That will be the data principal. Now, in case of a child below 18 years, legal guardian will also be called as a data principal for that particular child. Now, the third key definition is data processor. Data processor are the ones who are processing the data on instructions of data fiduciary. Now, what is processing of data? Processing of data includes everything: collection, recording, organization, structuring, storage, retrieval, use. You combine with other data, you index, you analyze the data, you transmit to some other region. Whatever you do with the personal data, that is known as basically data processing term. Now, if you are processing the data on instruction of a data fiduciary, you will be known as a data processor. If you are processing your data on your own, you will be data fiduciary, because you are deciding what and how the data is required to be processed. So the person who decides is the fiduciary. The person who acts on the instruction of the fiduciary is the data processor. Now, very important point is fourth definition, that is personal data. In particular of this particular act, personal data means any data about an individual who is identifiable or in relation to such data. Means if I can identify any person through a data, that will be personal data. Okay, that will be personal data, and we will discuss about the personal data in detail, because a lot of things depend upon the definition of the personal data and what information we have. Let's say, for example, in a particular company, food online platform or food aggregator, when a person places an order, what information that company is collecting from that person, before the person can place the order, and what information is getting stored in the food aggregator's ERP system, how that information is being utilized, where that information is going on. A lot of things depend upon that. And for example, being an internal auditor, statutory auditor, or being an advisor to the company, when I will come across that information, there are a lot many responsibilities, roles that we will discuss, that as an auditor or a professional accountant, we need to fulfill upon. So as of now, personal data means any data about individual who is identifiable or in relation to such data. Now, as Arpit sir was correctly saying, there are huge penalties and huge fines with respect to this act. if I can say, the penalty can range from 50 CR to 250 CR for different violations and non-compliances. So if I say a non-compliance will have a material effect on a company. Now you can understand there are multiple industries which are there who collect the personal data. Media industry, online platforms, shopping apps, if you have gaming apps, companies behind those applications, a lot of companies. Even as a chartered accountant, we also collect personal data of our client. When we collect the KYC details, that is a personal data. I can identify the client, I can identify the person through that KYC information. So that is a very important to understand, and I'll discuss what is personal data, but it is applicable to all who all are collecting personal data and processing personal data. So huge penalties, and penalties can be decided, like there is a bifurcation given in section 33(2) of the act, wherein it is being said that there are certain parameters based on which the penalty will be decided, like the nature, gravity, and the duration of breach, type and nature of the personal data affected by the breach, repetitive nature of the breach or violation, you could say, whether the person as a result of breach has realized any gain or loss, or any action that the person has taken to mitigate the consequence of the breach, and when those actions were taken, monetary penalties already imposed, or what would be the appropriate proportion of the monetary penalties, and impact of the monetary penalties on the person. So there are many criteria which are given in the act on the basis of which the penalties will be decided. But there is a schedule 1, which gives a brief range of penalties, like the maximum limit of the penalties in case of a violation, which starts from 50 CR in a normal residuary penalty, and may go up to 250 CR in case of failure of data fiduciary to take a reasonable security safeguard to prevent personal data breach. So a lot of things are there in the picture. A lot of requirements are there on the data fiduciary, and accordingly, heavy penalties, material penalties, which could impact even a going concern of the entity. Such amount of penalties are there. Now, these penalties, as I said, the requirement talks about all about the personal data. Now, there are 4 elements of personal data that we need to understand, and we need to then understand, okay, what are the requirements then, and how we are collecting those personal data. Number 1, the definition as says any digital data. Now, if we are collecting a digital data, okay, through which we can identify an individual, or we can point out an individual, or it relates to an individual, that will be personal data. So any digital data about an individual through which I can identify the individual, and like the individual itself are the 4 elements of the personal data. Now, a lot of people have asked me this particular question. When I talk about individual, it's a natural person or includes artificial person? A lot of people, come across, have asked me this particular question, whether individual include only natural person or the person like companies, partnership firms, because they also have some unique identifiers through which I can identify. For example, SIM number of a company, GST number of a company, PAN of a company. So whether those kind of companies, partnership firms will be covered under this particular act? As of now, no. So when I talk about individual, it's a natural person I'm talking about, not a person which will include artificial legal persons. So individual will be the individual natural person, you, me, or all the humans we are here. So we will be covered under this act. Our personal data will be covered, not of the corporates or other legal entities. Now, when I talk about personal data, we understood the 4 elements, but there are a few things that we need to understand with respect to the personal data. Like, for example, let's say I am an employer. I collect name, address, phone number, email ID, medical records of my employee. Can I call that as personal data? will that be counted as a personal data? Let's say I am an employer. If I'm collecting personal data of my employee and I have to collect for the purpose of employment, will that fall under the definition of personal data? Answer is yes. That will fall under the category of personal data because you are holding such information through which I can identify a person. Now, second step ahead to that. What about employees' performance evaluation at the workplace? Can I call that as personal data? And the answer to that also is yes. If you can identify through employees' performance evaluation that who that employee is, then that is the personal data too. So the personal data is not only the data with respect to your personal details, but any data or information through which I can identify an individual. Which even when I talk about in IT terms, my IP addresses, RFIDs, cookie IDs, session IDs, if I can identify a particular person, not necessarily I go and physically identify, but virtually also, if I can identify that physical person, then still that information, like unique identifiers like IP addresses, RFIDs, still will be counted as a personal data. So across globe, even if you take the GDPR, if you take any other, Swiss data protection law, FAFD, if you go to Singapore, all have taken the same approach with respect to the definition of personal data. Now comes the format of the personal data. Now, as I said, digital personal data, but what digital? Let's say if that is the information, I can read, that is the digital. What if I have a video recording? Will that be a personal data? I can see a person walking in a video recording. Images, CCTV footage. Let's say, for example, CCTV is there in an organization, to monitor the employee and for the security purposes and everything. We have seen, CCTVs in the offices. Now, the videos and the images from those CCTV can be called as a personal data. And the answer is yes, because you can identify that person in the video. If through that information, if you can identify the person in the video that is digitally available, yes, that will be digital personal data. So, and another thing to that personal data, for example, I have information about X person. Now that information is incorrect. I have information about X person. That information is incorrect. Can I still call that as a personal data? And the answer to that is yes. Again, our act, nor any other, even the GDPR, even the Singapore one, they do not talk about correct personal data or accurate personal data. They talk about personal data. It may be accurate, it may be inaccurate. And that's why there is a right given to the data principal to correct and to suggest correction in their personal data. Right to correct. That is there with respect to the data principal's right. So if there is an incorrect information also, that if through that incorrect information, if you have assumed that this person is that one, still that will be counted as a personal data. So the definition of personal data comes, is a very big. If I know you might be seeing, okay, it's a 2-line definition, single line definition, few words, but that contains a lot of things. A lot of things with respect to personal data. And why? Because once you will understand what is personal data, what is personal information, then only we can suggest to management, to those charged with governance, to organizations, okay, what you need to comply with, what you need to do with. Now, let us see as a chartered accountant. Let's say, okay, for example, I'm a chartered accountant. How can I help a particular organization, or how can I, assist the organization with respect to this particular compliance of this particular act, and with respect to enforcing or maintaining the compliance of this provisions. So first I will talk from the side of internal audit, and along with this, what I will be targeting is I will be discussing the provisions plus what we can do, how we can advise, how we can help how we can be the trusted partners for the organization. Now, there is a section 8.4 of this particular act which talks about that the data fiduciary shall implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure effective observance of the provisions of this act and the rules made thereunder. Now, when I talk about requirements of this act and a data fiduciary shall implement, data fiduciary can be your company also, and data fiduciary can be a client which is approaching to you who is dealing into personal data. Now, we have seen the scope of the personal data is very wide. If the scope of the personal data is very wide, there will be a lot of companies which will be dealing with the personal data. Now, those companies, because they are dealing into personal data, and the definition of processing is also very wide and exhaustive and elaborative, so they might be falling under the category of the data fiduciary, who decides what to process, how to process, and what data to collect. Now, once a company, let's say for example, they fall under the category of a data fiduciary, then they need to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure effective observance of this particular act. Now, as an internal auditor or as an advisor to the company, what we need to do, this act has recently came out, and the companies need to prepare for compliance of this particular act. So first of all, we need to understand, we need to help them in defining the processes. Like, okay, what process you need to keep in place in order to comply with the requirements of this particular act. Let's say, for example, there is a compliance requirement of the consent, that with the start of this act, if anyone has taken any consent before starting of this act, they need to take again the consent back from that data principal with respect to what personal data is being collected, for what use, and what are the rights of the data principal, and how they can make complaint to the data protection board. So again, the consent will be taken after once the rules will be into the place. So process defining is a very important point for the management, and there, as a chartered accountant, as the advisor, as the internal auditors, we can guide management, okay, how you can set up the process so that your process will be compliant to the data protection. Number 2, identification of data principles. Now, for each and every company, data principles will be these, can be customers, can be any other person. Okay, let's say for example, employees is a one category of data principle, customers is another category of data principles. Same way, there will be some other thing, other group of people who will be third category of data principles. Identification of data principle is very, very, very important. Once you will identify the data principles, then only you will be able to decide what personal data is being collected from them. For example, I'll just give you an example of a real estate company who is dealing into providing construction and housing and everything. So a typical real estate company. Now, at the time of booking, let's say a person came and he wants to book a flat of a particular with a particular real estate company. Now, at the time of booking, the person provides a lot of information, personal information to that company. As per the law, also they are required to collect that information. Now, what information is being collected from that customer is again, will fall under the personal data, but that customer will be data principal. Now, for that company, again, a real estate agent. Now, I am collecting information from my real estate agent and real estate broker who is registered under, RERA Act or MAHRERA Act. Now, when I will collect that information from that particular person, from that real estate agent or broker, again, that real estate agent and broker will become data principal because I'm collecting his personal information. So I need to identify who are the data principals for me and what are their rights. That is the thing we can help management to identify. We need to understand with whom the company deals. Okay, sometimes it could be vendors as your data principals, like you are collecting personal information of your vendors. So identification of data principal is very, very crucial. Third is a risk assessment. And we'll see at the later point in time data privacy impact assessment. But as of now, risk assessment means when we are collecting the personal data of that particular data principal, what we are doing that. How much personal data is being collected. Okay, for example, companies dealing with 2 brokers. Perfectly fine. I don't see much of risk here because only 2 brokers are there and there could be easy process set up for that particular company. However, if I say company, online platform or food aggregator, okay, or an app who is dealing with, I think 2.5 or 3 million subscribers, very big issue because you are collecting 3.5 million subscribers personal data. How is that data is being stored, where it is being stored, how it is being processed, all these things. So we need to help the management in performing the risk assessment, okay, about the personal data that is being collected, that is being stored, how many data principals are there, and what categories of data principals are there, how much sensitive or critical that data is there. Now, this particular act, DPDP Act, does not bifurcate between sensitive personal information or personal data and normal personal data. However, there could be scenarios that there is some data or personal data which could be considered as a sensitive in a common parlance, or with respect to some other act which is standing in force. Okay, so if there is a sensitive personal information related to a particular person, then that will be more, that will require more attention, and there will be higher risk with respect to the breach of that personal information. Okay, the more personal information we have, the higher the risk of breach is there, the higher the risk will be there. So internal auditors or advisors can help management in assessing the controls around that particular data storage, data retention, personal data processing, other areas and other legal compliances which are there with respect to the act. Periodic testing, again, very important. Why? Because once we have set up the policy, once they have defined the process, we need to, as a advisors or the internal auditors, we need to help management with respect to the periodic testing, and we need to provide whether your processes are appropriate or not with respect to handling the personal data. Now, why? Reason because a single breach can get you in trouble of a 200 CR penalty. A single breach can land you with respect to 200 crore penalty. So data breach is very, very critical, a very, very critical thing with respect to, when I call it DPDP Act. So periodic testing will help and will give a comfort to the management. Okay, our policies, procedure, and everything which we have designed is in place. Privacy governance. Now, privacy governance is a new concept which is being emerging now. Setting up privacy governance within the organization, and embedding the privacy in their processes. That is known as the privacy by design. So not to set up separate different controls, but to embed an element of privacy in your existing controls, in your existing process, or in your existing policies. So privacy by design will help the management to implement the requirement of the data privacy laws and regulations with lesser effect, lesser you can say manpower, or lesser time and cost that will be required. Now that is the one part where there is a requirement of the act, that is appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure effective observance of the provision of this act. This is the one part where we can help management or the company or the organization. Second part is again second provision, which is with respect to the data fiduciary. Now, as per the section 8(5) of the act, it says that a data fiduciary shall protect personal data in its possession or under its control, including in respect of any processing undertaken by the data processor, by taking reasonable security safeguards to prevent personal data breach. Now, how we can help management with respect to the compliance of this particular provision, and also to help them in implementing reasonable security safeguards to prevent personal data breach. First, we can guide them, okay, what is the personal data you are having, and how much risky it is there, how much there's a chance to breach of that personal data. Number two, we can suggest that, okay, what safeguard they can implement with respect to that personal data. Okay, by suggesting the safeguards, we will be helping the management in complying with this particular provision. Second, we can set up a reporting process, personal data breach reporting. So, whenever there is a breach of personal data, a reporting process where, management can get the details, okay, what was the breach, how much amount of personal data was, impacted and everything. Personal data breach reporting or breach report process can be helpful for management, where there we can, help and assist IT governance and IT teams to set up this process. Third, identification of systems that are capturing personal data. So we can perform walkthroughs of different processes, ERPs or tools which are there in the organization. And then we can identify, okay, these are the tools. These are the tools which are collecting personal data from the customers or data principals, or they are processing personal data. For example, as I said, a company is having an application for food processing, for food delivery, online food aggregator. Now, that particular application might be having another tool behind that for processing of the orders. Okay. Now, that application is processing the personal data. Okay, this person has given the order. This is the order. Sometimes, for example, you place an order on the application and you get, okay, these are the nearby customers or restaurants who are providing you the discount coupons or who are providing you the offers. Okay, so as and when I will enter the, let's say for example, my area, it will show me these are the restaurants near to you and they are providing this kind of discount. Even if you go to your restaurant where you order frequently, they will show you, okay, this is your last order or you order this item frequently. So means there is a tool, they are storing your personal data, okay, what you are ordering, who is that person who is ordering and everything. So identification of such systems which are processing your personal data or capturing your personal data, that will help management to ensure that, okay, now these are the systems which are either capturing the personal data or processing the personal data. Now I need to place safeguard around these systems to secure these systems from the personal data breach. Data classification policy, a lot of companies has, but a lot of companies still are in progress or in process of implementing this policy. So whatever information that is being produced inside the company or being used inside the company should be classified, like it's a personal data, it's private and confidential, or it is public data, it is data for the internal but not a personal data. A lot of classification tags can be created and accordingly information can be tagged based on the nature of information. This will help to identify, okay, from where the personal data is going and to which place. Now, there is one wonderful concept over here. When I talk about personal data breach, okay, the concept of breach means, there is a breach of the personal data has been exposed to, has been accessed by someone else. Okay, so if you see the definition which is there for the breach or breach of personal data, it talks about that any unauthorized processing of personal data or accidental disclosure, acquisition, sharing, using, okay, destruction, loss of access to personal data that may compromise its confidentiality, integrity, or availability is a personal data breach. So there was one question: can sharing of one information from one department of a company to another department of a company be counted as a personal data breach when they were not supposed to share? Let's say, for example, there is a HR department. HR department has a lot of information with respect to employee. Now that department is required to maintain confidentiality with respect to employee related details. Somehow they exposed or they disclosed employee related information to the some other department to whom they were not supposed to report. Let's say, for example, finance. Then whether that will be counted as a personal data breach, as of now, yes, that will be also a personal data breach, because the concept of personal data breach is not related to or not only restricted to legal entity to legal entity. No, it could be between departments within the entity itself. Why? Because even the definition specifies that, okay, if there is any disclosure, sharing, alteration, or use of personal data or access to the personal data which can compromise confidentiality, integrity, or availability, these three concepts, CIA, we usually say it, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If any of this is being impacted, being within the company itself, then there is a personal data breach. So the term breach, personal data breach, has a wider scope than we understand in normal terms. That's why the last area where we can help management to understand how we can prevent the personal data breach is by setting up IT governance. IT governance system, or data governance system, which is usually now known as a data governance system, helps management in managing the data, helps management to ensure that appropriate data is with the appropriate department, is not being disclosed, is not being authorizedly processed, or not being accidentally disclosed to someone else. So the CIA, that is confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the personal data remains remains as it was before. So with respect to this, we can help a lot of companies on this ground. Now the next particular requirement of the act is that a data fiduciary shall, unless retention is necessary for the compliance with any law, erase personal data upon data principal withdrawing her consent, as soon as it's a reasonable to assume that the purpose is, or as soon as it's reasonable to assume that the purpose is no longer being served or something like that. Okay, so if the data principal is requesting or withdrawing her consent, the data fiduciary has to erase the personal data. Or when you assume that, okay, now I have served to the data principal, or there is no need to keep the personal data because of the service that I wanted to provide to that person, or the data principal is being provided. Okay, or when I assume that, okay, that the specified purpose is no longer being served of that particular personal data, then I need to erase that personal data. And when I say erase that personal data, it's a very, very big thing, because you need to track when a data principal is withdrawing her consent, when you need to identify when the personal data is no longer being, is not serving any purpose, it's not being used, or I have served the purpose with respect to the data principal's requirement, now his personal data is not required. So behind every data, you need to see whether the purpose has been served and the consent is present or not. So here we can help management, we can help the company to track two things. One, the consent, whether the data which is being retained, which is being stored, whether they have the appropriate consent for that data or not. Number two, whether the data is retained or being stored for any purpose, or whether the purpose is, if the purpose is over, can we erase that data, or is there any legal requirement? So we can help management in identifying, okay, what are the legal requirements with respect to the personal data, whether you can store it, or whether you should erase it. So that is very important, so that unnecessary storing of personal data okay, will impact the right to delete of the data principal, and again it will lead to penalties. So data retention, very important point, and we can help a lot of companies, and as a chartered accountant, we can guide companies. Okay, what data to be kept, what data to be stored, what data is required to be deleted or erased, and how is to be erased. What is the notice that you need to serve to your data principals before erasing the data, and all those stuff. So I could identify in 5 different steps. That is, one is the data retention policies. We can help management in drafting data retention policies. Second, we can help management in tagging a specified purpose behind each personal data stored. So attaching a specified purpose behind each personal data, so that when the purpose gets over or the purpose is no longer required, we can delete this personal data if there is no legal requirement. Consent tracking. Although there is a requirement with respect to the consent manager in the DPDP Act, and we will see at the later point in time, but we can help management, to establish the consent management process, wherein they will manage the consent. Okay, we have received the consent from this particular data principal for erasing of her personal data. So in what time it should be erased, from where it should be erased. For this personal data erasure, and that is very important, because we are not only required to erase the personal data from our current copies, but from any storage copies that we have. It may include backups. So within the reasonable time frame, we need to remove the personal data of that particular data principal if it is not required by law, to be kept compulsorily from all the copies of the data backups. Like it will include backup, it will include all your storages, maybe cloud storage, maybe some of your ERP applications or any tools or anywhere. So from everywhere we need to remove. It's not just from one particular place, but every place. And compliance with the data processor. Now, what is this? So in section 8.7, there is a requirement that the data fiduciary will also be responsible for the data processor and data when there is a consent which has been received from the data principal to erase her personal data. We call it withdrawing her consent. When the data principal has withdrew her consent, at that point in time, data fiduciary will be responsible for erasing the personal data even at the end of the data process. So data fiduciary has to cause its data processor to erase any personal data that was made available by data fiduciary for the processing to that such data processor. Now that becomes a very big issue when you have cross-border data transfer. Let's say, for example, I am here in India. I have a third-party payroll processing. Third-party payroll processes somewhere else. Okay. Or let's say, for example, I am a food platform, online platform. Now I have a third-party processor who is processing the orders that I receive on my application in some other jurisdiction, some other country. Okay, but they act on my instruction that okay, you need to process in this way, you need to provide me back this data, you need to do this, you need to do this. So let's say I have a third-party processor in some other jurisdiction. So he will be data processor. Now he is getting the data from my tool. Now there is one particular data principal who withdrew her consent. Now, because she withdrew her consent, I need to ask the data processor, please delete her data. Now the question comes is whether the local laws and regulations of that data processor allows that or not. So if, let's say, for example, there is a retention requirement at the end of the data process, then what will you do? Then there will be a conflict, because as per the DPDP Act, we need to erase the data. On the other hand, the local laws and regulations of that particular country requires you to retain the data. And that's why it's a very complicated area when you have a cross-border data transfers, personal data transfers. And that is the next point I want to discuss. So in section 16(1) of the DPDP Act, the central government has there is a provision that the central government by notification will provide a negative list where you cannot transfer your personal data, where you cannot transfer the personal data of data principals, or the data fiduciary cannot transfer personal data for processing. Okay, so if I if I share my personal data to a jurisdiction which is under the category of negative list, then I'm gone. Then again, that will be counted as a breach of personal data, because and there will be a violation. Again, there will be can be huge penalties. Okay, so that's why it's very important to understand when there is a cross-border data transfer, where it is being transferred, which jurisdiction it is, what are the local laws and regulations of that jurisdiction, whether that entity, that jurisdiction is into the negative list. Simple example, let's say payroll processing. I have a third-party payroll processing entity somewhere in the Singapore, for example. Okay, now they process payroll for me. Now, to process the payroll, I give them the personal information of my employees. What if tomorrow that country comes into the category of restricted countries? Hypothetical example, not the current case, but what if that country comes into the restricted category? What you will do? So we need to understand where the payroll processing is happening, what are the laws and regulations of that particular local land, plus what is the requirement of this particular act, whether that particular country is coming under the category of negative list or not. And accordingly, we need to take the decision. So understanding the processor's jurisdiction is utmost necessary for a company. Some companies have their back office processing in some other jurisdiction. Let's say, for example, they might be having one office in back office processing for this particular type of transaction in China. They might be having in, let's say, for example, somewhere in Singapore. They might be having in Middle East, whatever. Understand the processor's jurisdiction. Number two, understand what personal data is being transmitted to that processor. What data is going over there, personal data. Third, we need to understand whether the data principal will be able to exercise his rights that are given by this particular act in that jurisdiction. For example, let's say XYZ country is there. Payroll processing is being happened. Okay. Not payroll processing, let's say food application, again, online platform, food application is there. Okay. Person is, person has created his account to order some food. While creating account, he provided his personal information, personal data, through which he can be identified. Now that information is being processed in some XYZ country and being stored in XYZ country. Now the local laws requires that you cannot delete any data which is being received from outside that XYZ country till 8 years. You need to store everything, okay, with respect to processing. Now, if the data principal from here will exercise, or if, let's say, for example, the data principal is withdrawing her consent, then whether that withdrawing her consent will get affected, whether the personal data, whether as a data fiduciary, I will be able to erase the personal data of that data principal which is lying with the data processor? Answer is no. So in that case, there will be a breach of data principal's right. So in that case, we need to advise accordingly to the corporates and entities that, okay, if you are transmitting some personal data to a jurisdiction, we need to understand what are the laws and regulations of that jurisdiction. Whether processing of the personal data in that jurisdiction, okay, is viable or not. And secondly, the rights of the data principal can be exercised in that jurisdiction. So just for an additional information, there was a European Union and US privacy shield. There was an agreement between the European companies and the US companies for the transfer of personal data. Okay, so GDPR is a strict one, and to comply with the GDPR, they came up with an agreement that was known as the privacy shield, wherein European Union's personal data or data subject or data principles which were there in the European Union, their personal data could be transferred to the US. However, there was a judgment by the European Court of Justice. There was a Screamers 2 judgment. Okay, in that judgment, it was held that the data principal cannot exercise his right in some other jurisdiction appropriately. Then, if he cannot exercise the right in some other jurisdiction with respect to his personal data lying in that jurisdiction, that will be equivalent to the breach of personal rights of personal data, and that will be equivalent to breach of right of privacy. So that was the judgment of 16 July 2020, wherein EU and US privacy shield was brought down. Okay, and it was held that if a data principal cannot exercise his right, then there is a breach of right, and accordingly there would be violations. Accordingly, there will be penalties, and the companies have to pay them. And there were huge penalties which were levied on Facebook, that is Meta Incorporation, in that particular case. So understanding whether the data principal will be able to exercise his right is very important. Because when we send a consent also, let's say for example, a lot of times applications ask you permissions and they ask you click on agree, click on agree, click on agree. But what is written in that? It's very important to understand, okay, when there will be a lot of things written, okay, these are your rights, these are your rights. But in actual, whether I can exercise my right is different point than writing just, in a privacy notice. Appropriate safeguards. Like if there is a transfer of personal data to some other jurisdiction, then there should be appropriate safeguards with respect to the personal data that is being transferred. At the end, the data fiduciary or the company who is, opting for third-party payroll processing is responsible. So they need to understand, okay, what are the safeguards that the third party has kept it or the data processor has kept with respect to the personal data. For example, I have, appropriate infrastructure at my place, let's say IT systems. I have invested a lot of money. However, I gave data to payroll processing person, third party, and somehow there was a breach of personal data at his place. Can I go and say, okay, it is nothing at my end, I am out of it, please don't come to me. I am not responsible because third party is responsible. He has done the breach of personal data. No, we cannot. Data fiduciary is the responsible person. Even with the breach of personal data at the data processor's level, data fiduciary will be the one who will be responsible. So tomorrow, if I'm giving to a company for payroll processing and that company is not able to keep personal data appropriate, there is a breach of personal data, I will be responsible for that. So before an entity or an organization selects a person or a third party for the payroll processing or for any data processing, or before a data fiduciary is appointing a data processor, it is very, very important or crucial to understand what safeguards are there at the end of data processor. And at that point in time, we can come in picture, we can help entities, organizations to understand, okay, whether you should choose this data processor or you should choose this data processor. Which data processor has appropriate safeguards, technical safeguards to prevent a personal data breach. So we can help entities in carrying out those evaluations, in carrying out those comparisons, and then we can guide entities, organizations with respect to, okay, you can go and select this third party as your data processor. Now with implementation of this act, there will be a huge responsibilities on the data fiduciaries with respect to selecting data processors. It's not just like that, I have written 2 lines in the contract and everything is done from my end. No. In actual on-ground implementations, in actual on-ground safety measures, securities, controls are required. Again, like next point, that is understanding of local laws. As I discussed, local laws are required to be understood with respect to the retention, processing, even with respect to the how much I will be able to enforce my contract with the data processor. Now, there is a requirement of Section 8(2) of the DPDP Act that a data fiduciary may engage, appoint, use, or otherwise involve a data processor to process personal data on its behalf, or any activity related to the offering of goods or services to data principal only under a valid contract. Now the question comes is, what is a valid contract? We have seen the Indian Contract Act, that is there, but here I'm not talking about Indian Contract Act. A valid contract is where you agree with the data processor that okay, the data principal will be able to exercise its right. You agree with the data processor that okay, data processor will have in place appropriate safeguards while processing your personal data, storing and retention and everything with respect to your personal data. And a valid contract containing clauses wherein there will be a binding agreement that okay, throughout the period when there will be processing of personal data, if there is a breach, then data processor has to compensate on behalf of data fiduciary to the data principals, or he has to pay the penalties and fines if even after appropriate safeguards. So all these things are required to be kept under the contract, and a contract that can be not only enforced at my place in India, but that can be enforced in any other country or jurisdiction where the data processor is lying. Because today it is very easy. Today it is very easy to appoint a data processor from other jurisdiction because everything is online. For example, you might have seen website like Upwork, Fever, and a lot of websites are there which provide you freelancer. Now, if I'm hiring a freelancer, again that will be counted as a data processor for me. If I'm giving personal data for processing to him, in that case, what valid contract I am having with that freelancer? That is very important to understand. Let's say, for example, I hired a freelancer to do the accounting entries, wherein I will provide the invoice to that freelancer for the accounting purpose. Now the freelancer is in, let's say, for example, Malaysia or Sri Lanka. Now in invoice, you have like I am a medical or doctor's office. I have an invoice behind that behind that patient's prescription, and both of the details are going to them for making the entry into the system. I am sharing personal data of that particular patient. Then in that case, what I need to have a valid contract with that particular freelancer before he can touch the data, before he can process the data. That is a requirement of the Act. And valid contract wherein data principal rights, appropriate safeguards, data retention requirements as per this Act can be complied by the data processor. So a binding agreement should be there between both data fiduciary and data processor. At any point in time, if you guys have any questions, okay, please feel free to ask. You can ask in question answer. I think chat box will be there. You can ask over there, and accordingly, if it is related to current topic, I will be taking it. So you can ask 3 questions at any point in time if you have. So cross-border data transfer is very, very important in after coming of DPDP Act. And with passage of time, we will see a lot of litigations on this area. Trust me, this is a very, very litigative area. Even with the GDPR, very litigative area, because how the data is being transferred, under what agreements, to whom, what is being processed, how the data process is exercising, or you can say keeping the data, everything will be there. So at that point in time we can help corporates in order to avoid these litigations at later point in time. If we design a process, if we help corporates, companies, entities design a process in such a way that they can avoid these litigations, then it will be, very best for them. I would say, ultimate best for them. Now, this is just a chart, global chart. The dark blue ones are the regions or the jurisdictions already where you have a data privacy or data privacy related acts. So you have some act regulation governing data privacy. Blue ones are the ones where, it is emerging, I would say. Let's say, for example, India. Now, India till, this August 2023, there was no data protection bill or, DPDP Act was not there. So it has been classified in blue because this is the data of January 23, January or June 23. So that's why India is being shown in the emerging one. But now India is also has their act. However, rules are yet to be notified and we will see the actual implementation with the rules. But there are jurisdictions where there is none. There is no data protection law present on the current, as of today. There is no data protection law present. And we should be avoiding those jurisdictions for the processing of personal data. Over the time, this chart will change. A lot of focus is now there on the privacy across the globe. So I hope soon everything will be blue. But again, we need to keep in mind that what that local law or regulation prescribes. For example, I think on 1st September itself, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they in 2020 implemented a data protection law regulation that has now came into an effect from 1st September 2023. So same way there was a Swiss Data Protection Act, that is FADP, that has came into place because EU GDPR is not applicable to Swiss. So GDPR is only applicable to European Economic Area. Swiss is not part of that. So Swiss has their own data protection act. So accordingly, we need to understand what are the local requirements. So now the question comes is, okay, people have questions that Google, FB, or other online platforms are capturing personal data. Will they be covered under this act? Answer is yes, they will be covered, definitely. So they are capturing your personal data. They are capturing for the processing purpose. So they will be covered and they will be known as a data fiduciary. So there is another question for processing of employee data under statutory act, whether a positive consent from individual employee is necessary. See, where there is a requirement of an act to collect some personal data, we are not required to obtain a consent. But having said that, we need to provide a notice informing the data principal that, okay, this is your personal data that is there with us. This is your personal data for this purpose that it will be used. And these are your rights with respect to your personal data. And if you have any questions or something, you can either file a complaint with the data protection board, or there are requirements of appointing data protection officer within the company. So you can reach out to the data protection officer. So when there is a statutory requirement, we are required to give notice, but not consent. Sorry. Now, with that, the next area, very important area that I want to discuss, we as a chartered accountant providing service, how much it will impact us. Now, while providing the service, if we are collecting personal data for the processing purpose, yes, we will be called as a fiduciary, data fiduciary, because we have someone else's personal data. And we will be in position that how we are processing that personal data, what to do with that personal data, how much time to retain with. We may be counted as a data fiduciary in certain cases. Again, we have to see case to case basis that, okay, what data is being collected. Okay, let's say for example, in audit, you might be collecting, all the employee related records and everything. So you are collecting personal data. And if you are collecting personal data, there is a purpose for which you are collecting and you are deciding. Okay, if you are deciding the purpose for which it is being collected, you are deciding what processing it will be done on that personal data, you will become data fiduciary. So chartered accountants who are providing either, assurance engagement service, or they are providing any advisory service, if they are collecting personal data, yes, they will be as a data fiduciary and they have to comply with the laws of DPDPA, provisions of that. Again, if you are collecting the personal data of the client, then client will be data principal, and we need to give him the notice, or we need to take the consent from him that, okay, this personal information will be collected, used, and processed in such a way. These are your rights. And if you have any complaint, you can either reach out to our data protection officer or to the data protection board for the complaints. But how we will give the consent, how we will take the consent? So generally, we need to take the consent through engagement letters. We need to, have the engagement letter in place. Again, we are still waiting for the rules with respect to the collection of the consent under the DPDP Act. But we can include relevant clauses in our engagement letter when we are signing the engagement letter with the client. Okay, that your data, personal data might be collected during the process, and accordingly, this might be processed for this purpose. And when the client will sign that engagement letter, he will be providing you the consent for the processing of personal data. Third point is very important with respect to us is collection limitation principle. Now, the first and foremost, provision or the obligation that has been put under the DPDP Act is that the data processing should be only for the lawful purpose and for the legitimate uses, or for the uses which are necessary to provide the service when you are collecting the data. Let's say, for example, hypothetical example, there is an application, food ordering application. Now the food ordering application, is collecting two types of personal data. Number one, personal data of the person who is creating the account. Number two, all the contact which are there in contact list. So the name and the phone number of those contacts. Now, although the data principal or the person who is creating account may provide you the consent, okay, okay, fine, take it all the contact list, but that consent will be void because you are not required, or there is no need to collect the whole contact list to provide a service of food ordering to that particular data principal. And that is also an example, these are the examples which are there in the DPDP Act, or you can take a reference from GDPR also. But collection limitation principle imposes a restriction for the collection of personal data, that I cannot collect all the personal data. Okay, give me that, give me that, give me that. No, there should be a limitation principle. Okay, this is the necessary data that I need to discharge my duties. This is the necessary data that I need to, provide the service, and that data should only be collected. So that will be applicable to us also. Now, second is the usage of personal data. If you have collected personal data during your engagement for a specific purpose, you should use that personal data for that purpose only. Hypothetical example. Let's say I collected personal data of a particular client. Okay, his phone number, email address, physical address, name, PAN, Aadhaar, everything. And why I collected? So that I can provide him the service. I can do the KYC checks, and then I can provide him the service which are required. But later on, I decide to send him advertising emails or information emails on his email ID or on his physical address. Whether that is part of my service, whether that is already contained in the consent that, okay, I will use your address for this particular purpose, I will use your email ID for this particular purpose. Usage, for what usage I collected the personal data. Let's say, for example, at the time of engagement letter, I might have written, okay, to provide the service, but later on I'm using the personal data to send him information emails, to send him other emails. that is not the appropriate use of personal data, and that will be, we are using which is not as per the consent, and that will be again a violation. So we need to understand for what purpose we collected the personal data and for what purpose we are using it. Very important. Now, if we have a personal data and there is a breach of personal data at our end, again, we have to notify to the data protection board with respect to the breach, and we need to comply with all the requirements. Even when we are using the work of another chartered accountant, at that particular point in time, we might hand over the personal data to that chartered accountant so that you help us out in the assignment, or we will be using his work, maybe a statutory audit or maybe an advisory service. At that point in time, when I'm using another chartered accountant's work and I'm providing him the personal data, he will be data processor. I need to have a valid contract, and all the things of valid contract that we just discussed before are required to be there in place. So as a chartered accountant also, we need to think before we share any personal data, whether, it may happen that we might be violating the requirements of the Act. Now, there are exemptions given in the particular, DPDP Act, which says that the personal data processed for the domestic or personal purpose is exempted from the scope. But as of now, there is no, explanation or definition given for the personal or domestic use. So it is very vague to classify that, okay, when we are processing the personal data is for the personal or domestic use. As of now, everything will be commercial only. Till the time some, exemptions might come into place or at a later point in time. But as of now, what the current picture is, yes, we have to comply. Now, with respect to the statutory audits, what is the role of DPDP Act when we are doing a statutory audit? How it can impact our audit? That is very important to understand. When we are carrying out the audit, there is a requirement of Code of Ethics, Section 360, not only audit, but in other cases also, Section 360 and 260 of the ethics. That is a no-cla. When we have to respond to the non-compliance with laws and regulations during the course of either audit engagement or employment of listed entities. So, for this particular purpose, okay, if you have to comply with the no-cla requirements, okay, if you have to, fulfill the requirements of the Code of Ethics, that is Section 360 and 260, we need to understand what is the act, okay, which is applicable to the entity. In order to understand the non-compliance, we need to understand the requirement of the compliance. Then only we can identify, okay, this is non-compliant, this is not a non-compliance. Okay, and accordingly, we can comply with the requirement of Code of Ethics. So, the requirement says that a professional accountant might encounter or may be aware of a non-compliance or a suspected non-compliance during the course of audit engagement of listed entities. Now, at that point in time, he needs to, either communicate or discuss with the those charges governance with respect to that non-compliance. Now, when I say non-compliance, non-compliance will relate to the either laws which are having direct effect or other laws and regulation. Now, what is the definition of other laws and regulations? That is that they do not have a direct effect on determination of the amounts of the client's financial disclosure, but compliance with which might be fundamental to the operating aspects of the client's business or to avoid material penalties. Now, we have already seen that there are material penalties in this act, under this particular act, and compliance could be material to the operating also. Okay, that's why it's very important to understand that DPDP Act will fall under the category of other laws and regulations. And if we are made aware of any non-compliance or if we suspect any non-compliance of this particular act, we have to discuss with those charged with governance. And for that, we need to understand what is non-compliance of this act. And for that, we need to understand what is compliance and what are the requirements of this act. So understanding the act is very important from this statutory audit point of view also for the listed entities, even when we are at the employment, because the no-clear requirement is also applicable to professional accountants who are employed with the listed entities. Okay. So same way it is applicable to professional accountant in employment and senior professional accountant in employment. So very, very important, and very good reason to understand the act and to understand what is the compliance requirement under this particular act. Second area with respect to statutory audit, that is SA 250, considerations of laws and regulations in an audit of financial statement. It is on the same lines of the no-clear, but when we are planning our audit, we need to understand what are the laws and regulations with respect to the entity which are applicable to the entity. We just now discussed that, okay, DPDP Act can fall under the category of other laws and regulations. So what SA 250 says? SA 250 says that in conducting an audit of financial statement, the auditor needs to take into account the applicable and regulatory framework. And for the other laws and regulations, okay, auditor needs to perform specified audit procedures to help him identify instances of non-compliance with other laws and regulations that may have a material effect on the financial statement. And we have seen that the penalties could have the material impact if they are the non-compliance. So I can say that auditor has to perform specific audit procedures in order to ensure that the compliance of the DPDP Act has been done or not for the entities where it is material or which are collecting personal data of data principles. And accordingly, there is another requirement SA 250 which says that to respond appropriately to the non-compliance or suspected non-compliance identified during the audit. So during the audit, we need to be aware, we need to be alert with respect to any non-compliance that we might come across with respect to this act. In that case, we need to respond. We need to see, okay, for example, I have came across a non-compliance with respect to this act, and management has either not rectified, or either has management is also not aware. So there are high chances that there could be personal data breach. So we need to understand whether there is a breach or not. What is the penalty under the particular act? Like the other laws and regulations, we need to evaluate what could be the impact on the entity's financial position for the non-compliance, and accordingly we need to take the next steps, and we need to suggest to those charged with governance or management what to do. So for that, we need to understand the legal and the regulatory framework that is applicable to the entity, their business model, that we already do under SA 315 and 250. But with respect to the DPDP Act or these areas, what we need to understand, what personal data is management collecting, what is the consent management process that management is having, what are the data security and safeguard processes that management has, what are the controls around storing, retention, erasure, consent of personal data, or processing of personal data are present. Controls around those areas. What are the obligations, how management is identifying what are their obligations with respect to the personal data. Is management aware that there is some obligation that you have to do something with respect to personal data? There are some responsibilities on you. So we need to understand what management has idea of. Okay. Whether management is aware that there is a rights of data principle. Is there any policy around this particular processing of personal data in the organization or not? How management is making the estimate, or how management is making sure that, okay, the personal data are being processed and there is appropriate compliance through these laws and regulations. So during audit, we need to understand all these areas. Not only that, we are required to report in case of Companies Act section 143 3I, which talks about reporting on the operating effectiveness and the design effectiveness of the internal controls, internal financial controls. Same way, we have the requirement of SOX. Okay, section 404 of SOX. Now, under both of these act, okay, there is a requirement where we issue an opinion on the controls which are there. Now, they might not be controls on the financial reporting process, but there could be a supplementary controls on the information through which the financial reporting information is being generated. For example, there is a source data that is a food process, food orders that has been, company has received. From that source data, there could be sales listing which might have been generated. Okay, name of person, location of person, what was the amount, and all those details. So sales listing. Now that sales listing again will go to some other control or process. Then that will go to some other control or process. Like this way, there will be a chain. Okay. So we might come across an information. Usually we call it IPE, information produced by the entity, which could contain personal information too. Now, if there is an IPE which contains personal information about a person, okay, in that case, we need to see what are the controls behind. Any which ways we have to see, that controls behind IPE. So again, from this point of view, also we need to see controls behind that particular information. Okay, how the personal data is being, processed, from where the personal data is going where, in which form. So we need to see the collection, accuracy, retention of the personal data. From one process to another, is there any impact to the personal data with respect to the confidentiality, integrity, availability, CIA, three particular elements. And we also need to see the controls around this whole process. Same way, we have a requirement in clause 49 of the listing agreement that CFO and CEO has to state and accept their responsibility for maintaining and establishing internal controls over financial reporting. So there are different requirements for the financial internal controls over financial reporting, and somewhere you will find the overlapping areas where financial reporting and the usage and processing of personal data coming into the picture. At that point in time, the controls should be there on the processing also, and they are again, tested under the ISC and SOX. Now, how to help organizations, companies, and entities with respect to journey to compliance? How we can help them? So it's not a one-day journey, it's not a two-day journey, it may require a year or two. Okay, we need to take up data privacy assessment in the next coming 3 to 6 months. You need to take data privacy assessment, develop data privacy framework, establish, help them establish data privacy, what you can say, in the organization, that is privacy by design. Then you can help them data discovery, classification, mapping exercise. You can help them develop a list of systems which are processing personal information. In the long run, help them develop policies, help them develop conducting up procedure for the data privacy impact assessment to understand which are the high risk data, functions, or the processes within the organization. Help them establish a mechanism for the consent management, consent tracking, or for the maintenance of the rights of data principle, for the reporting of data breach. And in the longer run, implement privacy through privacy by design. Privacy not as a separate process, but privacy embedded in each and every process. Okay, so help them to achieve that target, so that there should not be a separate privacy department or processes or control, but each and every control or each and every process within the organization addresses to the privacy. So it's a long journey, but yes, we have to start from somewhere, and we can help in this way to the entities. Now, again, other opportunities that we might have is, one is periodic data protection impact assessment. So section 10 to CI 10 to C1 talks about that a significant data fiduciary shall undertake periodic data protection impact assessment. Okay, now what is that one? So in data protection impact assessment, we understand what are the data, personal data into the picture, rights of the data principal, understanding the rights of the data principal, identifying the purpose for the process, why we are collecting the personal data. Okay, we do the risk assessment for each of the data. Okay, let's say for example, this personal data, this personal data, this personal data. We do the impact analysis. Let's say there is a breach in this category of personal data. What would be the impact of breach? If there is a breach in this category of personal data, what could be the breach? Which is the higher risk category of personal data? If there is a breach in this that category, what would be the impact? So we do an impact analysis and then we do a reporting of that impact analysis. Okay, so that is data protection impact assessment. And this act will require periodic assessments to be done for the significant data fiduciaries, and we can prepare ourselves to on this mark so that we can conduct these kind of assessment for the entities. Second, a lot of opportunities are there. There will be data privacy audits. So again, there is a requirement that the significant data fiduciary shall undertake data privacy audit, periodic data privacy audits. I remember in European region there are data privacy audit standards which are in somewhere they are discussing on that, and soon they will be coming up with a draft. But again, a very good area for the chartered accounts, and we can develop our expertise with respect to the data privacy audits. Then data protection officer. Now each and every significant data fiduciary is required to appoint a data protection officer who shall represent the significant data fiduciary, but who shall also be based in India. Okay, and he should be individually responsible to the board of directors. Means it's not something that a corporate or a legal entity, but an individual appointed by the entity resident in India. He can be the data protection officer. Okay, so again, a good opportunity for us. Then there is a next requirement of consent manager. So every consent manager is required to register themselves with the board before acting as a consent manager, and they should have that operational, financial, or other technical requirement. So we'll see once the requirement will be out, but again, a good opportunity. Then the next opportunity is with respect to the consent drafting, contract drafting. We saw the valid contracts are required. So appropriate clauses that should be there in the contract, appropriate things that should be in a consent. So drafting things will also be there for a lot of data principles that we need to take care for data processors. There we can help the corporates, and we can assist them in appropriate drafting, and the drafting which is in compliance with the DPDP Act. Again, that preparing for the law as a again, just summarizing what we need to do, summarizing the whole session. Privacy notices that we need to roll out, mechanism for obtaining and withdrawing consent, evidence of consent and notices that we need to help entities to take care for. Okay. There is an appointment of data protection officers, understanding of data principal rights, valid contract. Even there is a requirement of translation of consent in local languages, which are mentioned in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution. So we can help in there also. A lot of things are there. And to summarize, this is just a start for the data privacy in India. That's why you can say it's a emerging landscape as of now. That's it from my side. Any question, guys? Any questions? Any questions? Anything you would like to understand further or ask? You can type in the question and answer segment, and you can, accordingly raise your questions. I will be able to, look into that and able to answer. Okay. So if no question, then that's it from my side for today's session. And I hope you might have liked this particular presentation and the information that I have shared. Okay, there is one more question on with respect to again data being collected by applications on mobile. Yes, again data that are being collected by applications like Instagram and everything will fall under this particular category. That will be there. They have to comply with the DPDPA. Okay. Thank you guys. Thank you for your time. Thank you for participating today. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Harshad sir?
Yes.
Sir, 2 seconds, sir.
Just a minute. Sorry, members. A very good evening to all of you. It gives me an immense insight on such a wonderful topic which is utmost relevant in during this time. We are very much thankful, Arshad ji, for online and enrich. At the same time, we are also thankful to the members for participating in this webinar. Even though they are busy with their tax audit season, we are also thankful to the members. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.